third graders. I'm going to read chapter 11 today of our Detectives in Togas. And this is titled Snakes. So be interested to see how snakes play into this. They met in Minerva Square 2 hours later. The weather had turned foul and it was very chilly, and dirty gray rain clouds were scudding across the sky. Flavius's teeth were chattering. He had drawn the hood of his cloak far down over his ears. Perhaps his shivers were due as much to the thought of Lucos as to the cold. Antonius showed them all a small dagger he had concealed in the folds of his toga. Just to be on the safe side, he remarked mysteriously. He then made a great show of hiding the weapon under his toga again. You act as though Lucos were dangerous, Julius said nervously. He might try to put a spell on us after all, Antonius said. In that case, your dagger won't be any help, Julius replied. A dagger always comes in handy, Antonius insisted. Odysseus put out the Cyclops' eye with one. That was a sharpened stake, Julius said. We might take a stake along then, Antonius offered. Mucius urged them to get moving. We must be back home before the doors are locked for the night, he reminded them. Have you any money with you? Julius asked. Why? Mucius was taken aback. Lucas won't prophesy for nothing. I haven't a single copper with me. Antonius and Publius were also penniless. Mucius was furious. We should have thought of that before, he reproached the others. All I have is my regular pocket money, 35 sesterces. That's all I own. It'll cost more than that, but maybe we can owe him the rest, Flavius suggested. Or we can tell him to send the bill to Livia, Julius said. No, Mucius said. Lucas won't use his second sight unless he sees money right under his nose. We can't waste time either, because Rufus has to be rescued as soon as possible. Who knows what he may be going through right now? It's horrible in prison, Antonius said. They chain the prisoners up and give them only bread and water. Rats run over their faces, and they're beaten too. I once passed by the prison and heard some awful screams. How much money do you fellows have at home? Mucius asked firmly. That was an embarrassing question. Not much, Publius murmured. I have a gold piece my uncle gave me for my birthday, Flavius admitted. Pleased, Mucius patted him on the back. Fine, he said. That's 100 sesterces already. What about you? He asked Julius. I saved a little, Julius stammered. I wanted to buy the collected works of Julius Caesar. They cost 300 sesterces. I've saved up 200 already. Then you'll have to donate 100 of them, Mucius decided generously. Julius sighed in resignation. I can borrow something from our cook, Antonius said quickly. We have a famous cook who comes from Gaul. My father paid a fortune for him. Run and get the money, Mucius ordered them. I'll wait here for you. Flavius, Julius, and Publius returned in short order. Julius brought his 100 sesterces, Flavius his valuable gold piece, and Publius a heap of small copper coins. Antonius arrived a little while later with a long face. His cook had proved to be a disappointment. What a skinflint, he complained. He wouldn't give me anything at all. Says he doesn't have any money. But I fixed him. He held up a round cheese, broke it into pieces, and offered a piece of each of it to each of them. I don't want cheese, I want money, Mucius said. I have some money too, Antonius replied. I asked my father for an advance on my allowance. He happened to be at home and was in a good mood on account of Praetonius' victory over the Gauls. Here's 50 sesterces for you, he says, as gracious as Jupiter in person. Buy yourself figs and honey. You know what? For this money, we could get a whole barrel of figs. This money doesn't go on food, Mucius said, taking the coins. He gathered all their contributions and wrapped the coins in a clean handkerchief. We now have 297. That ought to be enough. After all, all he has to do is look at the chain and tell us who the burglar is. That shouldn't cost too much. They set off, and a half hour later turned into Broad Street. The closer they came to Lucos's house, the deeper the silence grew among them, like a patrol nearing enemy lines. When they reached the big door, which they had often stared at with such curiosity, they stood indecisively for a while. Across the street was their school, and they regarded it with almost with affection. "I hope Xantippus doesn't see us," Flavius said. "He's lying in bed and groaning over his leg," Publius said. "Don't you think we ought to do something about getting in?" Julius proposed. Mucius nodded in agreement. "I'll knock," he said, and he began drumming his forefinger against the door. When nothing happened, he knocked again. Still nothing stirred, and Publius began pounding his fist against the door. Finally, Julius and Antonius took part, kicking vigorously with their sandals against the thick wood. When all this had no effect, Mucius tried the latch, and the door opened. It had not been locked at all. A few feet beyond it, however, was another door. This was bound with strips of iron and had neither lock nor latch. Halfway up the door was a square pane of yellow glass, and the boys peered curiously through. Each in turn staggered back in terror. Behind the pane of the glass, a frightful grimacing face, illuminated by greenish light, was staring at them. "That's Lukos," Flavius gasped. They waited anxiously for a while, but nothing stirred. Finally, Mucius peered through the glass once more and said, "It isn't Lucas, it's only a mask." "What a horrible mug," Julius said. "What's the idea?" "I suppose to scare away evil spirits," Antonius said. "It could scare away even the good ones," Publius grumbled. "Here's a ring beside the door," Antonius noticed. "It must be there for a reason." "Pull on it," Mucius suggested. When Antonius pulled the ring, there sounded from somewhere deep inside the building a quivering bell tone, like a sigh from the world of shades. "What a gruesome noise," Julius murmured. Suddenly, the door flew open without a sound, as though moved by ghostly hands. The boys stared, but there was no one in sight. "He opened it by magic," Antonius whispered. Before them stretched a long, dark corridor. Back of the yellow pane of glass in the door hung a wooden box to which the mask was fixed, and it was lighted by a small oil lamp with a green shade. "Clever that," Julius whispered. "What do we do now?" Publius asked. "We'd best stay here at the door," Flavius recommended. "I see a curtain back there," Mucius said. They walked slowly down the corridor as far as the curtain and then hesitated in front of it. There was a faint, moldy smell. "Well, what are you waiting for?" a hoarse, unfriendly voice called out abruptly. "Come in." The boys started in fright, but automatically obeyed. Mucius pushed aside the curtain and went right in, and the others followed him uneasily. They found themselves in a large, vaulted room, only dimly illuminated by a flickering fire in a fireplace. The bare walls glistened damply and were completely windowless. All around stood high columns, their tops lost in deep shadows. From each column hung a grinning mask as ugly as the one behind the front door, and all the masks were illuminated from within, so they all looked like many horrid ghosts. The soothsayer sat behind a large table with his back to the fireplace and stared at the boys in silence. He looked even eerier than they had imagined. Long, dirty yellow hair fell in tangled strands down to his shoulders and over his forehead. As far as his eyes, his face was strangely painted. Here's a picture. There you can see all the masks and the soothsayers and the boys peeking around. The upper part of it was white. From his mouth down, it was painted black, so that the top of his face seemed to be detached from his body. He wore a long black cloak embroidered with silver stars, and in his left hand he held a ball of polished metal which reflected the glow of the fire. "Come closer," Lukos said, hoarsely lisping. The boys edged up to the table, which was heaped with writing tablets and yellow parchments. Their eyes fell on a sharp, short sword, which filled them with distrust. But they were most disturbed by a basket filled with writhing snakes. Lukos scrutinized the boys with small, cunning eyes, which seemed to them somehow full of hatred. "What do you want?" he asked. Mucius hastily thrust the chain into Julius's hand. You talk better than the rest of us," he whispered. "You speak to him." Taken by surprise, Julius laid the chain on the table. He kept a respectful distance from the snake. "Good day," he said politely. "We hoped you could tell us who this chain belongs to." "There was a burglary at the home of our teacher Xantippus, and we would like to know who the burglar is because Rufus has been arrested. You see, we are Rufus's friends, but he is innocent, and that is why we have come to you. We have heard that you know everything, so perhaps you can help us." Julius fell silent and gazed hopefully at Lucas, but his speech seemed to have made no impression. The soothsayer stared intently at the chain and did not say a word. The boys did not know whether he had gone into a trance or just fallen asleep with his eyes open. Julius cleared his throat. "We have an idea the chain belongs to the burglar, so we would like to know what his name is and where he lives. That should not be a hard job for you, should it?" Still Lucas did not reply. He closed his eyes and remained silent and unmoving. It was uncannily still in the room, and the boys could hear nothing but the low crackling of the burning sticks of the wood in the fireplace. "Maybe he wants his money first," Publius whispered. Julius summoned up the courage once more. "We'll pay, of course," he said to Lucas. "What will it cost for you to use your second sight for us? We have money with us." The effect of those words was startling. Lucas sprang to his feet. He was much taller than the boys had imagined, at least a head taller than Publius, who was lanky and big for his age. Pounding the metal ball on the table, the soothsayer thundered, "Get out!" The boys were stunned. "Get out of here, you shameless brats!" Lucas screeched. Suddenly his hand flashed into the basket and he threw the wriggling snakes at them. The boys screamed with terror. They all ducked at once, and luckily the knot of the snakes flew over their heads. A single snake became detached from the rest. It hit Flavius in the face, bounced off, fell to the floor where it wriggled right side up, raised its head, and hissed at the boy. Flavius almost fainted with shock, but seeing his friends making their escape from the room, he uttered a piercing cry for help and flew after them. As if pursued by the Furies, they raced down the long corridor, squeezed through the two doors in a body, and ran down Broad Street, almost all the way to the Forum. They did not stop until they reached a public fountain where they greedily drank the cool, clear water flowing from the mouth of a stone lion. Gradually they grew calmer. Finally, Julius said, panting, "I guess Lucas took a dislike to us." "We escaped death by a hair," Antonius said. "Magician or not, he has no right to throw snakes at people," Publius complained. "They must have been poisonous," Antonius said, leaning over the edge of the fountain for another drink. But suddenly he straightened up a bit with a cry of anguish. "Oh, help! A snake has bitten me! Help!" He writhed and twisted convulsively while the others stood helplessly around him. Suddenly something fell to the pavement with a ringing sound. It was the dagger he had hidden. During their wild flight, it had slipped down under his toga, and as he stooped over, it had pricked him in the stomach. Publius and Julius roared with laughter. Antonius, too, was enormously relieved and seemed to appreciate the joke. Flavius alone remained silent. He could still feel the horror of the damp, cold, slimy snake on his face. "Where is Mucius anyway?" Publius asked, looking around in surprise. There was no sign of Mucius. It was already dark and the streets were almost deserted. A gust of wind whipped up a billow of dust in front of them. Thunder boomed in the distance. "I don't understand that," Julius said uneasily. "Where can he be?" "Probably he ran first, before we did, and went right on home," Publius said. "That isn't like him," said Julius. "He has never been the first to run away, and besides, he has our money with him." "He thought maybe we'd fool around and he wouldn't get home on time," Flavius said. "His father's very strict about that." This seemed convincing, but the others still felt queer about Mucius's absence. However, they did not have time to think much more about it. A brilliant streak of lightning flashed across the sky, followed by an ear-splitting thunder. Immediately afterward, a fearful shower of hail began pouring down on them. "We'd better get home," Publius shouted. He tucked up his toga and began running with great leaps down the street. The others followed him at top speed. Well, that was a pretty good chapter. Tomorrow, chapter 12 is a river inside a building.